Welcome everyone to How to Start a Consulting or Coaching Business, hosted by the City of Mississauga and presented by the Mississauga Business Enterprise Center. A little bit about MBEC. We are part of the Economic Development Office here at the City of Mississauga, and we are your central source for small business information, guidance, and support. Everything you need to know is at one URL, mississauga.ca/MBEC. When you do go there, there's a link to take you over to our Future is Unlimited microsite where you can find even more information. So right now, during this crisis, and part of what we are doing right now is to support you continue to support you, but we are also doing it virtually, and it's still Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And we do things like webinars such as this. If you have a small business question, especially during this time, and you want support, we have a business consultant and a whole team to provide you with information or guidance. We also have entrepreneur programs, which I'm going to talk a little bit about coming up, and including the Young Entrepreneur Program. So the futuresunlimited.ca is where you can also go, and that's where all of our contact information, our entire team, and you can fill out a form or give us a call, and we'd be happy to help. So the summer company is the entrepreneur program, and applications are open if you are 15 to 29 years old or know someone who is, and they are a budding entrepreneur or just curious about it. Let them know that it is open. It's an amazing program with mentorship and training, and even a grant up to $3,000. So we have an info session. It's free next week if you're an educator or a parent or a student who wants to learn more about the program. We encourage you to attend one of our information sessions. mississauga.ca/young entrepreneurs is the website where you can get more information, apply, or even sign up for these information sessions. Some of the other things that we offer are, as you know, these upcoming webinars, and we only have a couple up there right now, but there is more to come. So next week I'm doing social media marketing 201. So if you have been working with your business and using social media, but you want to take it to the next level, that is the session you don't want to miss. I have two guest speakers coming on. One's a graphic designer and a social media guru, and then we have Amin Preet, who many of you know, who is a UX degree student. She's amazing, and she also is specialized in target audiences, so she's going to be joining us. And then we have how to film, edit, and use videos. A very dynamic individual. If you guys were on this morning, you will know Hassan. He's coming back next week, and you get to learn some tips and tricks on how to do that. So more to come, including our Women's Entrepreneur Conference. I just got that on tonight, so you can register if you are interested. It's free. It's hosted by the City of Mississauga, as well as in partnership with FedDev Ontario. And that's Tuesday, March 9th. The good thing about it being virtual this year is space is unlimited pretty much. But so if you're interested though, let us know, sign up, thefuturesunlimited.ca/events, and it is posted there now. And if you missed any of our recordings, this is the link to find it. But if you just go over to the website, there's a whole bunch of them. Business consulting, how to start a business, a whole bunch of digital marketing ones. And we're consistently putting them up there. So have a look. And Instagram, we're really excited. Our social is going crazy. We have a lot more people on the team to help us now. And one platform that you want to connect with us is on Instagram. So at Mississauga EDO, please follow us. We really, we're going to keep this active and lots of stories and lots of engagement. So follow us there. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Mississauga EDO. And if you can't remember those two, just head over to the website, and it's right at the bottom. That's where we have all the links. And without further ado, I want to welcome today Vern Vautour, who's our guest speaker, a certified management consultant, business coach, advisor, someone we have worked with here at MBEC for many years, but he also works with a number of other companies and other small business centers and is incredibly qualified and has a lot of certifications. And he is going to speak to you tonight all about starting, or even if you are currently starting, how to take your coaching and consulting business to the next level. Connect with them on LinkedIn. Oh, and I've left Sue's contact information in there. You don't want that. But Vern, I will make sure that your information is out there for them as well. So without further ado, I am going to switch over for you guys. And then you can start sharing, Vern. So while we're
Very good.
doing that, we have 50 plus people on. So welcome everyone. Here we go. While we're doing this, for whoever has just arrived, some housekeeping. If you are new to our sessions, the only video is for us as presenters, and panelists can see all the questions and that you put in the chat for us and comments, but unfortunately you can't do it amongst yourselves. So you are not alone, even though it may look that way. I will monitor the chat, which is where I hope you will put in the comments and questions. And then certain periods, Vern's going to ask for questions and I will bring them forward. So there you go. Vern, do you want to start sharing, or are you able to?
Oh, I thought I was already. Pardon me.
Not yet.
Are we there?
You are there.
Perfect. Hi. So basically, if I'd like to know, have you been thinking? I mean, you signed up for this presentation for a reason. So I'm hoping that you're thinking about becoming a coach or doing some professional consulting as a self-employment career option. So if you have excellent work and industry experience and want to adapt to the changing business environment and being shaped by employment trends, technology, and the ongoing shift in the way things are being affected by the COVID-19 pandemic these days, then this 1.5 workshop will allow you to explore professional management consulting and or coaching as a self-employment career option and determine whether it's right for you. So let's get started. So this evening, we're going to talk about splitting this webinar into 3 sections and round up at the end with a question and answer period, although I will stop briefly after the first section just to see if there's any questions. So in this first section, we'll define and talk about consulting and or coaching as a career advice, or as a career choice rather. So let's start out by talking about the industry, trends, and statistics. According to StatsCan, the consulting industry in Canada in 2017 was a $13 billion industry and $350 billion worldwide. And as you can see in the chart, management consulting makes up about 71%, scientific and technical consulting makes up about 16%, environmental consulting services make up almost 10%, and the other makes up about 3%. So if you live in the province of Ontario, you'll find this interesting. Management consulting in Ontario makes up 40% of the volume of the 26,465 Canadian business consulting establishments. The International Coaching Federation recently released the 2020 ICF Global Coaching Study undertaken by PricewaterhouseCoopers and had over 22,000 respondents globally. The information provided is deemed proprietary, and we've provided a link in the resource section of this presentation so you can download your own free copy. But I can tell you that overall, from other general sources, that business and organizational coaching, the total global revenue from professional organizational coaching is just over $2.5 billion, and that's globally. So if you think about that, that's a very small piece, a smaller piece of the pie than management consulting. It has trended growth over the past 5 years and is expected to continue growth over the next 5 years. So there's coaching practitioners who work with organizations internally and externally, and that there are managers who use coaching skills in their organizations. Coaching by gender, by the way, reveals that there's a slightly higher number of female practitioners over male. And there's also a fact that credentialed coaches have a significant advantage over non-credentialed practitioners. So I'll give you information about that a little bit later too. In terms of statistics and trends, recent stats are showing us that the world won't be the same after COVID-19, and that we'll be living, working, and doing business differently from what we're used to doing in the past few years. In fact, some of the things that are trending now in the workplace means that people need to reskill and adapt to new ways of doing things. A recent survey by McKinsey Global discovered that 87% of company executives were saying that they were experiencing significant skill gaps in the workforce, and they need people who can be flexible, enterprising, adaptable to the new post-COVID economy, especially in the areas of technology, critical thinking, social and emotional skills, adaptability, and resilience. As well, a recent report by freedomstreetinc.com called Corporate Predictions 2021 summarized some pretty darn interesting findings. For example, according to Gig Economy, did you know that 50% of the workforce is now freelance and subcontracted? And it's on the rise too, especially with intercompany fractional work, whereas executives who traditionally hold regular management positions are increasingly providing their advice and skills to organizations on an interim for hire basis. Not only that, 30% of executive management consultants get offers for full-time positions. But amazingly, 10% will still decline the offer as they prefer change and adaptation in these digital times. Other trends over the next few years will include a huge increase in digital development as more online, artificial intelligence, and virtual marketing will grow exponentially. Opportunities will include remote working, virtual instructor-led learning and coaching, an increase in marketing activities with a huge emphasis on digital assets and social media. And not only that, because of all the changes, a lot of companies are having to redefine the customer experience. So exactly what is the difference between a coach and a consultant? I went online and I looked at a few different sources, and I liked, there was a blogger, his name was Paul Klein, and I liked the way he described it, and I kind of agree with what he said. So he said a coach is someone who influences behavior, provides action steps, but controls nothing with their clients' outcomes. Coaches will advise and provide direction, the steps to get to an end result, but they're not responsible for the end result itself. They adopt a role closer to a mentor or advisor. A consultant, on the other hand, provides solutions to complex problems and in some cases controls the implementation. Paul also mentioned that he found that consultants will rarely consider themselves a coach, but a coach will at times consider themselves a consultant. I actually do both. While some consultants are generalists, most consultants are specialists in one niche area and are hired to produce a specific outcome. So as you can see in the little table here, there's counseling, coaching, consulting, and mentoring, and we're just focused on consulting and coaching. Whereas consultants work with problem-focused, they're problem-focused and tell orientation, whereas with coaching is more ask orientation and solution-focused. So that's the big difference. For the purpose of this presentation, I'll focus on the business management consultants' roles. So as a career path, business consultants are involved in change management, operations management, and get involved in specialty areas, which I'll give you an overview about shortly. So consultants are found globally, and they're often engaged in tasks where companies are realigning their strategies and are change management pros, supporting innovation and creating best practices. So with the assessment and analysis, consultants will identify problems, create a hypothesis of what the end result should look like, prioritize the most important issues with stakeholders, define the depth and scope of an engagement or project, conduct SWOT and gap analysis and clarify objectives, And as a result, they're also involved in data collection, synthesizing findings, developing recommendations and alternative actions and options, and providing feedback and developing action plans. Once a consulting engagement is completed, they may participate as a content expert to implement the changes or the action plans. So content experts, they get involved in solution design and delivery for such things as technical manuals, technical assistance, operations manuals, HR manuals, health and safety manuals, process development and documentation, or leading the projects for that matter in those areas, checking for operational effectiveness, measuring results, and finally, producing consulting reports or project synopsis. Typically, the majority of consultants earn between $56,000 and $120,000 per year, and some specialists earn upwards of $150K to $250K per year. And the gender gap in this industry is not too skewed, as 55% of consultants are male and 44% are female. So for employment or self-employment contract positions, there are a number of large consulting agencies that are located regionally, nationally, and globally. And some of the larger consulting firms in the market include Deloitte, KPMG, Ernst & Young, Price Waterhouse, NMP Corporation, Carpedia, and Accenture. So you may have heard of some of these large companies, and they might be just the companies you would go to get subcontract work. For any consulting projects, estimated pricing is usually calculated using hourly billing rates and at project costing. Most consultants calculate project estimates using hourly rates ranging from $60 to $200 per hour or more, and then translating that into longer term projects by quoting either per diem rates or quote by project. And as you can see in the diagram here, you can see that there is a difference in pay between people who are just getting into the consulting business versus early career, mid-career, late career, and experienced. So depending on the specialty and the type of work, this graph shows a marked difference between more typical types of consultancy over the highly technical skilled consultants. When it comes to experience, credentials, and education, consultants must have a good mix of all these elements to ensure success in this field. Here's a partial list of some of the employment requirements you likely need to work in this field. So in deciding whether or not management consulting, technical consulting, or other types of consulting or coaching is for you, you should research and assess and compare consulting environment and assess your own skills and strengths. Determine what certifications you'll need. Check to see if you need any special licensing, and mostly, are you qualified? So in addition to that, you'll likely need to understand the attitudes and personality factors needed, the dependability and reliability factors, have the skill to develop a source of supports, learn where you can get skill upgrades, and understand what experiences you may need. There's a high expectations of what a management consultant or business coach can deliver for value to a company or organization. After all, the success of consulting or coaching must deliver satisfactory results, and or in the case of consulting, may be the only bridge and opportunity to save a company from failure. Therefore, there might be a lot at stake. So here's a partial list of some of the key success factors that a consultant or coach may need, such as soft skills. Soft skills such as emotional intelligence, being an outstanding communicator, self-motivation, tact, and persuasive abilities. At the entry or the contract relationship building and getting and opening an actual contract, like getting to that yes, you need to be a good closer. You need to be able to recognize problems. You must be able to provide clarity and understand the scope and objectives of what's needed to be changed. or fixed or adapted. And you also have to get to know your stakeholders and connect and develop relationships and engage and work with the stakeholders. And most of all, you need to know your worth. As it relates to negotiation and contracting skills, consultants and or coaches need to have a very high level of communications, content skills, presentation skills, and people skills. They need to be a leader, influencer, team builder, and to be able to discover and understand problem structuring in order to create a position for actionable solutions. As it relates to consulting assessment and analytical skills, consultants must be synergistic and able to clearly provide options. They have to be good at data gathering, use their analytical skills as they build relationships with their stakeholder clients. Not only do they identify problems and create actions, but they may be called to use their implementation skills where they have definite specialized skills for the job at hand and not afraid to roll up their sleeves as needed. They also need management skills, experience, and capacity to lead. At the end of any project, business consultants need to wrap up their engagements with a proper closure and with reporting with attention to detail. And of course, consultants most likely need to be properly credentialed and experienced according to industry standards, as well as good industry contacts. So now we've covered off the main points about consulting. Any questions to this point?
We do have a couple. One, and maybe you're going to be covering this later, but someone wants to know about incorporating and liability insurance for consulting and coaching. Will you cover that later?
Actually, I do. I will make some recommendations there a little bit later. I'll give you a little bit more information. I think one of the key insurance, you need liability insurance for your operation, but more importantly is errors and omissions insurance. So like a doctor will have malpractice insurance, a lawyer and or a consultant will have errors and omissions insurance. And that's absolutely necessary. You're taking risks if you don't have it. So you want to mitigate your risks. And I'll speak to that a little bit later as well.
Okay, thanks, Vern. Is there a difference between freelancer and consultant? Or can you explain those terms really? Because
Well, a freelancer is pretty well self-employed, and a self-employed. I mean, in my humble opinion, they're if you have an established operation, are you? I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I hate to put it to you that way. Am I a freelancer? I do a lot of consulting. I do a lot of coaching. I do have clients, and I don't consider myself a freelancer. I consider myself a full-time management consultant and business coach, trainer. That I've never had that question. I'm sorry. I don't know how
it's
to
and
answer
it's
it.
interesting. It comes
Yeah,
up in my world of digital marketing for sure.
yeah,
And freelancers typically understood, and I think that term keeps evolving, but is usually where you just do one-off projects. But you're maybe registered, but you're not
yeah.
as committed 100% like incorporated, going through the whole thing with the intent to potentially expand. I don't think it's an either or. It's
Yeah, I do hear
interesting.
the term freelancer. I don't know. When I think of a freelancer, I think of somebody that's just wanting to make a few bucks here and there. Or I don't know what the actual definition is, but I could
Mhm.
certainly look it up if.
Well, no,
Anyway,
and
by the
we'll
way, when it comes to research, Google is your best friend. I can tell you that right now.
no,
So,
right. But freelance can go across many different professions, right? You can
oh,
be a freelance
absolutely.
video, you can be a
Yeah.
freelance writer, but so consulting is a specific discipline
Yeah.
perhaps you're a freelance consultant, but you may also be a dedicated consultant.
I mean,
One last, oh, sorry.
I've heard of people who have like they're gainfully employed somewhere, but they do freelance work. So it's like it's almost it feels like an extra type thing. But I don't want to get into semantics
No, and you're going to talk a little bit about conflict of interest potentially down the road.
if it's asked. Yeah.
If it's okay. Okay, so we do have one question, and he was just referencing one of your I think it was a couple graphics before. You mentioned that performance consultants make 61% more than general management consultants. Is that correct?
That's
Okay.
what according to payscale.com,
Okay.
that's what they basically published.
Okay. Um, and the difference between management, what does it mean to be a management consultant? Does that,
Management
yeah,
consultants are considered generalists. So
okay.
I'm a member of the CMC Canada, which is the Canadian Association of Management Consultants. So management consultants have always typically have an understanding, just an understanding of all the functional areas of a business. And then you have specialists. So there's a lot of certified management consultants who are specialists, but in actually doing or working on a proposal, or there's a process. I'm going to actually go over the process with you, just to show you what we use as certified management consultants. But the I'm losing my point here. Help me out, Laura.
So a
Sorry.
performance, so a management consultant is typically general
Yeah.
and,
So typically
okay,
it's yeah. So typically management consultants are generalists.
okay.
They have to have, like, there's a body of knowledge that as a CMC we had to actually learn and embark on and write an exam on. And so there's a recognition of all the functional areas of a business. So even though we're specialists, what we might have to do is engage other consultants to work on projects if we're not. And that's where this conflict of interest comes in. Our code of ethics, for example, um, dictates that if there's something that we're not qualified to work on, we have to step up to the plate and say, like, this isn't my wheelhouse. This isn't the area that I specialize in. So you're going to have to get an expert in that area. But
That's a,
the fact that being a generalist means that I can identify the fact that there may be other professionals that need to be brought into the fold.
thank you. And a performance consultant, can you speak to that quickly or to define that?
Well, I'm not going to give you. I'm going to make something up as far as I'm concerned. I'm sorry for not having a definite definition of a performance consultant, but I would imagine that it's probably an HR function, and that somebody comes in and manages people or looks at the way people are functioning or doing their work. That's all I can do. That's all I can tell you. I'm sorry for
Mhm. No,
sounding a little
that's
bit naive, but I'm not a performance consultant on the one hand, but on the other hand, when I write operations manuals and I get involved in maybe work, doing a procedural manual, what have you, you have to think about performance in terms of uh, things employees have to carry out in terms of their jobs. And yeah, so I don't know
okay.
where to go from there.
Nope, that's great. And it segues in. There's a couple other questions. I will respond to them because it's you're going to address them coming up too. So
Yep.
it's back to you, Vern.
Yeah, thank you. So this next section, we're going to actually look into the consulting engagement process, setting up the steps, what you need to do to actually set up an operation. Looking at, I'll give you some promotional and revenue generation tips, and we'll talk about the managing risk issues that we need to think about or talk about. So as it relates to strategic planning and consulting, we can apply that to specific functional areas of the business in an overall approach, or applied to a specific area of business, such as this list shown. So basically, these are some of the functional areas in a business. You'll find that there's specialists in each of the areas, or there are generalists that can work in many of these areas. But keep in mind that sometimes in a large project, working collaboratively might mean working with other internal or external stakeholders, consultants, and leaders. Special attention must be directed to identifying the specific deliverables of any project that you're an expert at, and being able to engage other experts where you are not. So I'll briefly walk you through the consulting engagement process. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a certified management consultant, and was credentialed through the Canadian Association of Management Consultants, or CMC Canada. But there are other certification bodies for other types of consulting, and I'll mention them later in the resource section. But for the most part, most consulting or coaching engagements follow a similar process as the CMC model, which, by the way, is ISO certified. So there are three main phases in any engagement, and that includes entry or the contract phase, the execution phase, and then the closure phase. So during the execution phase, there are three distinctive steps. So one is diagnosis, the next one is action planning, and the third area is implementation. So let's talk about the entry point of a potential consulting engagement. And the reason why I've got this chart CRM, which is Customer Relations Management, is because it takes time to develop relationships with potential clients. So this is not usually billable time. So if I spend time writing a proposal and pulling all the pieces together, it is normally not billable. So this is where the consultant establishes relationships and a common understanding that a consulting engagement can be beneficial to both the organization and the management consultant. These relationships are usually developed over time through the consultant's prospect development tool. So a good CRM or customer relationships management software or data collection system helps you to have tools such as sales goals, plans, defining and developing your qualified prospect lists, developing a database, having relevant information about your customer or prospective customer, a follow-up or tracking system, an understanding of the consumer continuum, and an understanding of your stakeholder personalities. So the better we get at understanding our client, the more effectively and efficiently we move through the negotiation to a contract and agreement stage. In the negotiation and contract agreement stage, we need to show our expertise in problem identification and analysis, hypothesis or identification of what the end goal will look like, and the most important issues need to be prioritized and agreed upon. We have to ensure that we identify with and include all our stakeholders, and a great proposal must outline the depth and scope of the engagement, including the identification of an analysis and action plan, and identifying the actors, the players, and the expertise needed from both sides to work in collaboration with who will carry out the specific project items. As well, the contract should be summarized, billable, including elapsed time. So when you're working with a quotation, this is just a sample of a cost sheet that I've used. And actually, when I do it on a spreadsheet, it's a little bit more complex or complicated. So when you're working on a quotation, you should potentially use a range of estimating tools, including billable time estimated. So you can have actually two columns there. So you can have your time estimated in high and low to include possible contingencies. And also in cost ranges, you can have a high and low cost range or hourly rates or per diem rates. And then of course you need to establish your elapsed time and potentially using a Gantt chart. So even though I might have 5 hours of billable time to do a certain task, it might, in elapsed time, it might take a couple of weeks to get that process or that part of the project completed. And keep in mind on this sheet that the entry time is not usually deemed to be billable time. So when writing a proposal to quote for services, I'll be honest with you, most times that there's either an RFP, which is a request for proposal, or an RFQ where you are already deemed to be a vendor of record. You could be asked for an RFQ, which is a request for quotation. And usually what happens in those cases, you are told you are told that the terms and the circumstances and the project objectives. So it's not you having to write that up. However, if I were to, I won't use the term freelance, but if I have an individual client who has asked me for a proposal, this is pretty well the outline that I would use so that I cover everything off. So you can see that you start out with, of course, a nice title page, an introduction and background. So you're talking about context, putting context into the proposal. And then you have to address the depth and the scope of the proposed project, including the role that the consultants, leaders, and employees might play in the delivery of the project. And a scheduled timetable like a Gantt chart works really well for this because you can show, how your project's going to roll out over time. And a project budget should always be summarized and then detailing the cost of the work and the payment method. So these are the conditions. So in the consulting business, or at least for years, I've always, if I have a large project, I usually ask for 30% upfront, 30% interim, like an interim payment partway through, 30% at the end of the project, and then that leaves the 10%. So if I ended up working the project and actually saving the client money, I can roll that back in the final, or I can charge my HST at the end of the contract, and or if there's any other adjustments or items that I need to consider, then I would add them in on the last payment. So that 10% could be maybe less than 10%, or it could be more than 10%, depending on how the project's gone and whether the client has asked for anything else. So the next step is the assessment and analysis stage. So the consulting project requires that most skills applications to the overall project or engagement, including goods and process management. I must say that the most important tool begins with a gap analysis and a SWOT analysis. So essentially, I'll show you with my hands here, but a gap analysis is essentially, this is where we are now, and this is where we'd like to go. And so that distance is the gap. And so where you have a project where you're overreaching and you can't accomplish what's involved in, the gap is too big, then you need to reformat your approach. And if you think about it, and I use this as an analogy, and I know it's a really simple analogy, but I often say, if you look at the spark on a spark plug in a car, if you're mechanical and you understand that, if the gap is too big, what happens is you get backfiring because the gas won't, the gas won't explode with a spark plug. If the gap is too small, you end up flooding the engine because you don't get a spark. But when the gap is perfect, you have a smooth running engine. And so at this point in time, like, you really have to understand what is your project, how big is the project, and whether you can handle it or not. And the SWOT analysis is extremely important too. So project stakeholders must establish their current position, where they'd like to be, and decide if the resulting gap is potentially doable or too far a stretch. So the SWOT analysis is conducted where you need brutally honest observations, which must reflect a true picture of what is and how management will embrace and capitalize on the strengths and opportunities and mitigate or reduce the impact and take steps to overcome the weaknesses. It may take a good amount of data capture to expose findings that will lead to developing well thought out recommendations. With data collection and synthesized findings, often using tools like business model canvas, market niche planning, operational strategic planning tools, financial models that are used to developing recommendations, you can then suggest alternative actions and options. Now, having said that, I'm not a technical specialist, so I work in sort of the general area. So these are the tools I use, but technical specialists are going to use other tools as well. So that now moves us into the implementation stage. So implementation, as a result of your research, your feedback, your trials, strategically effective action plans are created. And now the implementation kicks in, and the consultant who might have been brought in to do a consulting engagement, their engagement actually physically ends at the last step. And so at this point in time, a content expert will be engaged in implementing solutions, designs, delivery, checking and testing effectiveness, and measuring results. So in many cases, direction and new policy may result in training, producing manuals, policies, marketing, training manuals, HR manuals, health and safety, processes, procedures, and more. And so the implementation stage is usually conducted by an expert. And I would honestly say that in a lot of cases, the person who did the consulting is actually the content expert as well, because they were hired to solve a problem. So they worked through the problem. Now they're implementing it. At the end of a consulting engagement, extension is discussed, or the project is finalized and a consulting report or project synopsis is submitted. So here's an example of a Gantt chart in this slide. So let's talk about setting up. So to set up and be successful in this business, you really need to consider, among other factors, deciding on your niche market and or your target markets, and including your geographic territory, your industry sectors that you'll work in, your demographics, and especially understanding the psychographics or culture and client consumer preferences. Then you build up, or you cost up your business model. So how much do you need? What are your startup costs? What does your billable time look like? So you need to take a cost accounting approach in terms of how much time it takes to complete a task and tasks, and when or what are your billable rates. So creating a sales plan, cash flow budgets may be required, allowing time for sales and development and strategic planning. So in essence, can you become sustainable? Can you make this work for you? Be sure you have the right certification and credentials for your branding and your reputation. Register your business, and then determine your location and how you'll set up your working space, and whether you'll have a physical commercial office, a home-based office with virtual business address, or virtual business address with or without available rental space, meeting rooms, and supports. Or maybe you might select or find a shared space, or becoming an associate within another consulting firm. So get insurance, especially liability and errors and omissions insurance. And here's something that actually help in terms of getting insurance. There's group policies that you can take advantage of by joining an association. So that can be invaluable, since it keeps you current with trends, allows you to circulate among other like-minded professionals in your field. And not only that, you might get huge savings in purchases, rentals, and insurance through group discount programs. Develop rapport with your potential clients and be interested in them. Get to know how you can help them to deliver ultimate value. As you get going, you need to develop a database with a steady stream of contacts and plan your current and future business. You need to develop processes within your own company, policy, protocols for all aspects of your business, including branding, publicity, promotion, social media, and marketing communications. As it relates to promotion and social media, most experts would agree that LinkedIn for consultants and coaches is number one is the #1 used social media outlet. And if you know how to creatively network, you really don't need to spend any money at all to generate business from LinkedIn. Other great ways to build your brand and network is to join a member organization to get visibility. Align with associations and create blogs, white papers, and presentations. Guest speak at events to be seen as a content expert where you actually end up selling in bunches. Promote by meeting potential clients and doing informational interviews, and attend trade shows. For improving your management and business effectiveness, consider using virtual and cloud-based digital tools to manage your business. Here's a partial list. Digital calendars, such for scheduling appointments, Google Workspace, or the MS version. Google, I forget I don't know what it's called. I use Google Workspace. So CRM, customer relations management software, survey and data collection apps. SurveyMonkey is one that I use. Cloud-based storage, bookkeeping and billing applications. I use FreshBooks. Dropbox, Microsoft OneDrive, backup applications, team collaboration applications, VoIP phone services, and other collaborative apps. There's lots out there, and so be very judicious and careful about what you pick. And there's some that are hugely advantageous, and this is where it's important to link or meet and talk with other consultants and find out what they're using. So you're using a lot of social comparison in order to find information that you're looking for. As it relates to sales processes, have a good costing system. Use a cost accounting approach. Use Gantt charts to estimate projects. Estimate costing using scales, hours, rates, and don't forget to estimate elapsed time. Consider subcontracts with other companies. When you're quoting and negotiating for business, remember that you'll have better results if you tailor your approach to your customer. And to understand potential customer continuum, create your database and groom your database or your base of potential clients. And you have them pretty well in what I would say columns or silos. And the first thing you do is eliminate not qualified clients. And if they're qualified but not interested, spend a bit of time educating them, and at some point decide whether they should be your future clients or eliminate them. Learn to develop close relationships with qualified, interested, but not particularly ready clients. Maybe there's a reason for the fact that they aren't ready at the moment. So once and at the same time, they should be your client. So if you know they should be your client, then groom those relationships with them, because believe me, if you hang tight, you're going to get the business. And close the clients who are qualified, interested, ready, and committed. Don't oversell them. I think what happens a lot of time is you got the sale. So for heaven's sakes, write up the contract, get it done. And so go through the process that I showed in terms of, doing a quote, and make sure that everything is very clear right from the beginning what the deliverables are. So as it relates to managing risk, as I mentioned before, get liability insurance, errors and omission insurance, establish policy and processes, ensure that your contracts are fair and in place. Always get a deposit and build in contingencies. So now we've covered off the main points about the consulting and/or coaching. So the next section is consulting associations, coaching associations, and other resources. So any questions to this point?
We do have a couple. Anyone else? Drop them in the chat. Do you charge more if the project ended and it took you longer, or do you commit to that quoted price that you gave them?
Run that question by me again,
So,
because it sounds like
so
if I
yeah,
have a project, am I being given extra work? I stick to the same bill rate,
no.
or let me
Not,
understand that correctly.
there might be two. There might be a couple things in there. And speaking from experience, so you to have a project that took longer. Perhaps it was, or you had to put in more work because that whole scope creep, right? And they added a
Mhm.
little extra, or else there was a delay on that part, or whatever it was. I guess that's two answers there. If you delivered the same amount, but perhaps it took time, do you charge more? If they added in more stuff, I guess you would
Well,
obviously commit to
I
it.
think the easy answer is that when you negotiated and drew up your contract, you have to outline what your contingency plan is if there are extras. If there are extras. So in other words, if you're asking me to reframe a certain section of this and or go into a different direction, I'm not having to redo a quote, but I might have to adjust it. And so again, we're always negotiating. At the end of the day, you really have a genuine interest to please your customer, to make sure that they're happy and that you're delivering what they'd like delivered. I always say try to over deliver instead of under delivering. And so what happens is if I quote something, if it's a couple of extra things, I don't go ballistic or I don't take it to task. I'll probably let it go and or I'll point out to the client, listen, this isn't a problem. I'll look after it. As long as it's not too big of an imposition. If it's not a big imposition, it's not a big deal. I don't, for me, it's about making sure that you have a satisfied customer, number one. Number two, if I actually gave the client value, like when they're over wearing my welcome, that's where I kind of get my cackles up and say, excuse me, but I think we have to revamp this because it's outside of the scope of this particular project. So why don't we talk about that? And why don't we address that? So at the end of the day, I mean, I've had clients where I said, listen, I've gone over $1,000 over in terms of services. And in order to develop relationships, I sort of have this happy attitude. And it's like, all right, you owe me $1,000. So bring me a client that's worth $1,000. So it's always a give get. If I give you something, what are you going to give me back in return? So as long as there's a balance in there, I would like to talk about, and I'll just talk about negotiating, and I'll tell you a little story. I had a client one time, and what she used to do is she delivered workshops on a regular basis. She worked for a very large company, and their typical clients were, you know, 5-star rated companies. Um, and so anyway, what happened is she was she was in one of my programs where I taught people who were on unemployment and they became self-employed. So she was a freelancer, I guess. I have to laugh there. But she decided to go into business on her own. And so she got an appointment with IBM. And she said, I'm going to be visiting IBM. I only met her once a month. So she says, I'm going to be visiting IBM and I'm going to be pitching them because I've actually delivered workshops for IBM with the other company that I was working for years. And she said, typically, you know, a weekend workshop, they would bill out at about, I don't know, $3,300. So, of course, she went and she met with IBM. So a couple of weeks later, it was our it was our phone call, and she gave me a shout out, and I said, "So how'd you do?" And she kind of said, "Well, I'm not sure." And I says, "Well, what do you mean?" And she says, "Well, I met with IBM and I told them about my workshops, and they were really happy with all the deliverables and what we were going to do. And at the end of the day, they made me an offer." And I said, "Great. So you got a job?" She said, "No." I said, "Well, what happened?" She said, "Well, they offered me $2,400 for this workshop." So I just want to share this one point because I said, well, did you take the job? She said, of course not. They're only offering me $2,400. I wanted 3,200 and they're offering me 24. I'm not compromising on my quality. And it's like, oh, okay. So number one, she has no reputation. I mean, other than the fact that she has delivered workshops there before, other than the fact that they do like her, but don't forget when her company was charging $3,200 for a weekend, she didn't get paid that, nowhere near that. So the point is that, this is what IBM kind of understands too. So I said, okay, well, and this is important about the negotiating. You want to create a situation where everyone wins. So if you want to use, a guide for doing your business or whatever, I would recommend potentially the 7 habits of highly effective people. Kind of work that all the time. So rather than being reactive, I'm proactive. And then seek first to understand and then be understood and think win-win. So basically, I said, I can think about 4 or 5 different scenarios right now that you could have gone and done and saved the day. And her response was, well, I don't know, like, what do you suggest? And I said, well, before I say that to you, I want to know, did you burn a bridge? And she says, I don't know. I said, why don't you know? And she says, because I walked out and I was really ticked off. And I said, well, you know what? Let's talk about the 4 different scenarios. So I would imagine that some of you have already figured that out. Maybe you can make some comments and Laura can bring them up. But here's one of the things that I said, okay, so you say to the client, okay, you're offering me $2,400. Let's revisit what my deliverables are so that potentially I can give you 2,400 or we can negotiate for a little bit more. So she didn't even bother negotiating. She was so reactive and she got so out of joint that she kind of left the meeting. I said, well, the one thing you could have done is revisit all the deliverables and then see if they volunteer to offer a little bit more or whatever. So that was one approach. The second approach is just think and ponder for a minute, and let's talk about this. Your engagement, you wanted 3,200. IBM has, I don't know, they published a magazine. The circulation for their magazine to both their employees and professionals out there was about 13,500. So they publish a magazine. If you wanted to place a full page color ad in that magazine, it would cost you about $800. So what's 2,400 plus 800? 3,200. So how about, I'll do it for the 2,400, but you do a 1-page ad for my company in your publication and you write up a 2-page story. Do we have a deal? So that's sort of like, I'm creating that win-win scenario. Or another approach might be, I'll tell you what, I've thought about that. Can you book 10 events for the next year? And I can do them for 2,400 each. So what I've done is I've saved a lot of time. So the point is that I always work in there's nothing absolute. I mean, if you say that your consulting rate is $150 an hour, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot quite a bit. So you need to develop rapport. You need to find out where the client needs to be, because you'll never do business unless you're congruent with them. And so the thing is that you need to negotiate with the client in terms of the deliverables, restate the deliverables, make sure you're all clear on it, and define where that over point is. So if you know where that over point is, then to answer that client's question that asked, whoever asked that, the answer right there is, it's going to depend on your contract.
Mhm. And that's and speaking to that too is the value, especially when you're starting out, having a
Mhm.
case study and the willingness to give them they will give you a quote and you be able to maybe publish a success story on your website is incredible because also, as you know, when you put in a proposal, people want to see examples of work you've done. So
You're,
now you've just created an example of work which is invaluable for future work. So those are
yeah.
all incredible points. Yeah. So if anyone has tips on that and they've had an experience with that too, drop it in the comments because we can also share that with everyone afterwards as well. Because this is the whole part of networking and talking and meeting other consultants to get ideas like what you're sharing, Vern. And I appreciate that. Without one last question before we move on, just for the sake of time, is it okay or best practice to give a range of hours if somebody's an estimate and just say at a certain milestone you could review that? I'm not sure what best practices you would suggest.
Yeah, I'm gonna comment on that because I get a lot of business and I write proposals. My close rate's around 95%. And I'll tell you why my close rate's 95%. I work with the person and work out that win-win situation. Okay? For me, is it going to make a difference whether I get an extra $500 or more or $500 less? I mean, really, we need to deal in ranges. I wished I had some of my training materials up, but go back to, yeah, go back to this slide here if you can see it.
Hmm.
And I don't know if I can, am I able to grab a marker or something? Yes, I am right here. Okay, here we go. I got a laser pointer. Yes, perfect. First time I've worked this, Laura.
Okay.
So if I set the rate, if my ideal rate, let's say, is $150 per hour, so that's my center, that's my target. Okay. If I if I know what my lowest rate is, what's the lowest I can go? So what I need to do is I need to do two different scenarios to calculate what I can absolutely my bottom line. So my living expenses might be lower. I might not be able to uh, get, you know, uh, hit the target center every single time. It might not be possible. But if I establish a range, so for example, I can do when you quote, you can say I can do I I can go as low as. So let's say I want to make $80,000 a year. On a regular work week, 40 hours a week, 80,000 is 80,000 divided by 2,000. 80,000 is $40 an hour. Okay. So I can go as low as $40 an hour, but you're booking me 40 hours a week for a full year. Now I can go to $40 an hour, right? But the chances are, and I don't have to look for another customer. I don't have to do marketing. I don't have to follow up with people. So potentially, I can charge a lot less, even though my goal is 200. When you start working out, like as an individual consultant or independent consultant, you'll probably figure out that 1/3 of your time, 33% of your time, potentially might not be, you're not billing anything. You're still looking for work, you're still looking for clients. So I have a sliding scale, and that is if I just do 1 hour's worth of work and I have to do a couple of hours of research before, I'm going to be billing out at $250 an hour. Who cares? Right? And I'll quote my price. But before I quote my price and I develop that relationship with the client, and I usually, my rule is whatever your highest rate is, go to your customer, go to your client and say, I'm coming in, like let's say a project is $10,000 at your top rate. So I basically tell them I'm coming in at between $8,000 and $10,000 an hour, $8,000 to $10,000 for this project. Am I in the range that I need to be? I'd rather develop a relationship with the client and figure out where they're at. And let's say I know for a fact I can't go below 4. So really, you're working in numbers. It's just a number, and at the end of the day, and as by the way, as your reputation builds, you become worth more, not worth less. Unfortunately, there isn't a word in the dictionary called worth more. And so the thing is that you call your client up and you say, I'm coming in at around this amount. Where do I need to be? You know, when people have quotes and they have a deadline and this and that, I don't just, it's not, you know, doing business with companies is just like a resume to try to find a job. Anybody that walks into a place and just hands in a resume thinking that, you know, they might have felt good by dropping off the resume. You might have felt good. And I've got one client I'm working with right now in the machinery business. And he basically, he's not getting any business right now because of COVID, but I'm helping him to get the business because he's not developing the relationships. He goes into a company or he has, you know, some advertising or marketing, and basically he's dropping the resume on the desk. Nobody looks at the resume on the desk. When you've got, I've worked with companies where I got 350 resumes on my desk. I'm not looking at them, but the person who stops to do an informational interview, the person who stops to get personal and to develop the relationship, those are the people that you end up working with because you remember them. So it's very important that when you're quoting a job, number one, have a range and develop a rapport with your client. And this is why I close 95% of my quotes. Now, another thing too is that you might be in a situation where the government, whether it be a city or a province or the feds, they put out an RFP and they tell you that there's a due date, and then they have a question and answer period. So maybe there's an opportunity where you got the bid and tender lists or what have you, and you're trying to develop your proposal, but there's an information session. It's very important to go to that info session, and it's very important, if you can, to get the list of all the players there. Because I'll tell you a little secret. Most government projects, and there's a mandate, they have to get 3 quotations. So what? Who wrote the specifications for that proposal in the first place? Right? So rather than being the follower, oops, sorry, I don't know what happened. My slide just jumped. And it just disappeared.
Did it go to another screen or
No, I think I hit my mouse by accident.
reshare?
Yeah, I'm gonna do that. Yeah.
We have to
So
watch
anyway,
time too, Vern. We're
yeah,
10
no,
after. Okay.
actually, based on what I have, I think I'm doing very well.
Okay,
So
good.
I've got good time. So I just wanted to relate maybe. So anyway, the point is that if you go for a government contract, they already put the quote out there. It's going to be, there's a very high probability that the expert consulting firm or whatever helped. Because firstly, if I go to the government or, you know, any huge agency, when I go to them, I basically say, do you need this? And I did it again. I don't know what slide I'm at. Hang on. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. So essentially what happens is you have to, so what happens, get the name of the people that are making proposals and then find out who got the tender. Because chances are you might get some subcontract work from that. That's the point I was trying to make. You may be able to get subcontract work from that, number one. Number two, government has limited funding. So when they do their budgets, they spend their money on different projects and whatever. But one thing you might want to consider is saying, how would you like to run a pilot project? And they'll say, well, what's that? Well, they always have contingencies to do pilot projects. And guess what? If the pilot project is successful, guess who's going to get the consulting work? Because now they got to put it out to tender and they've got to get 3 bids. You wrote the specs on it. You know what I'm saying? So again, it's all about those relationships that you build. Anyway, I won't waste any more time. Is there any more questions, Laura?
Um, can you approach a client to revise your rate after you have delivered a project or 2 for them? I think I understand that.
The answer I'll give you is yes or no. It's really going to depend on the rapport and relationship you have with the client. If they're really happy with your work and they have the budget, they'll give it to you. Often what happens is when I go to a client to do a quote, I'll say, "What's your budget?" Or I'll say, "This is what I'm coming in at, but tell me what you need. Like what's going to make this work?" And they'll tell me, "Well, you know what? Instead of an $8,000 project, they'll say, well, 5,000 would work." Okay, would 6,000 work? So now I'm negotiating, right? And they'll say, "Yeah, I think we can work with that." That's great. So as a rule, when I do a quotation, I need to know what the max is that I can get. And I always say, when you're negotiating, a client and you are good for 10. And what I mean by that is you're both good for 10% up or 10% down. If I really like and want to work with you and you're too expensive, right? You'll probably come down 10%. Or the client isn't offering enough, they'll probably come up 10%. So the point is that you always have to be negotiating. Try to find out what's on the table and work at that angle.
It's
And you're going to build your reputation up by how you deliver. If you deliver good service, or you do you do well for the client you know does well by you, then you'll always be asked to come back potentially.
Mm. Is there, since we're okay for time, is there a difference if you are approaching the business owner who is directly involved with their whole business to maybe a government or a corporation where you're actually dealing more with the department head? Is there a different approach that you would ever take or the same?
Well, the thing, again, relationships are key.
Okay.
Okay, the relationships are absolutely key. You have to understand, you know what? You have to understand the game board. So whoever you're working with, you got to figure out their game board. And that's why you need to develop rapport with clients. If you don't develop rapport with clients, how are you going to know how they make decisions? So if and it depends who the stakeholders are, number one, and number two, it depends on who the influencers are. Because if you talk to the right people, you're gonna get the results.
Mm, that's good. Great
And
advice.
the other thing too is that sometimes when you have to make a proposal as a consultant, and you're actually sitting down in front of a bunch of people, a group of people who are the stakeholders, you have to get to know every one of their personalities and figure out the way that they're thinking. And you need to get the lead decision maker on board first. And once you got them on board and they know that they have to present to other you have to present to other people, and they know who the other people are, then just ask them, in terms of negotiating this contract or whatever, what are some of the things that have worked for you in the past? What hasn't worked? And if things were absolutely perfect, what exactly would you suggest as a one single thing that your company is either looking for, or what's the one thing that you're looking for? And the minute they open their mouth, this is my mastery of sales speaking here, my presentation on that. But the point is that the minute I ask for that one single thing that would make a project perfect, or make the consulting or coaching engagement perfect, once they open their mouth and suggest that one thing, then right away I go, what else? What else? What else? Because once they start to speak, then you're on top of your game right there. If they don't speak, they don't think much of you at this point. So you need
Mm.
to get, and I'm sorry for putting it that way, but you really need to get on board. In a lot of cases, what happens is if you recognize that you're not the only expertise that's needed, it's outside of your scope of what you do and what you do well, you might suggest to them that, and you might team up with somebody and say, "I have a perfect person to work with you on this. I can do this, this, and this, but here's someone else that can help the other pieces and parts." So really what you're trying to do is you're trying to make everything fit. Think of your customer and what do you need to do, or what do they need to make the out to create the perfect scenario.
Mm, that's great. Thanks, Vern.
I
Um,
do have some other resources and information I can finish up in a couple of
yep,
minutes or a
do
few
that,
minutes,
and then
and
we'll
then we
hold
can,
the questions to the end.
yeah, if you
Let's
don't
do that.
mind. Okay,
Yes.
because there's actually not a lot here on the one hand, but on the other hand, I just thought that when we put this presentation out, um, all our participants in this webinar will gain some really good what I'll call contacts and information. So hopefully this is what you're looking for in terms of my audience. So the Project Management Institute, or PMI, they're the people, they're the body that actually does the PMP designation, so project management. And then there's the Canadian Association of Management Consultants. So um, you can see that, hang on, I just have to move this thing. So I'm looking a little bit differently here. There we go. Okay. Um, so, so you've got different consulting organizations. There's tons of them. I mean, if you go on Google and there's lots that do designations, et cetera, but I think in Canada, in fact, CMC Canada is just one of 43 countries. The CMC designation is worldwide. Its head office is in Geneva, Switzerland, and it's really got a good reputation in terms of certification and what have you. But then, you know, if you're a technical consultant, go to any of your associations, and most associations will have designated certificates that you can get. So whatever industry you're in, go to Google and type in industry association for, and whatever your keyword industry is. Punch that in. I guarantee that you'll get some really good contacts. Then there's coaching associations. So the other day when I was putting this together, I'm a member of the International Coaching Federation as well. They have a Canadian branch and they have a GTA chapter. Since I moved out of Toronto, I don't have a chance to go very often. So I haven't been supporting the organization and getting behind it on the one hand, but I'm associated and I am a member. And having said that, they have a whole certification process. There's about, I don't know, 5 or 6 different levels that you can get. And they're a really good group to meet with. The other two, Adler, I know the CEO for that organization, so I thought I'd put a plug in for them. But they do courses on consulting, and they do certification courses, that sort of thing. And if you go online, I mean, around the world, there's all kinds of associations, but I'm just giving you the key ones or the big ones, and you can check them out. In my presentation, I mentioned the business management consultant, and that turned out to be under the NOC, National Occupational Classification, it's the NOC number is 1122. And so if you go to that particular website, it actually mentions different titles. It gives you the main duties, secondary duties, education and experience required, you know, that sort of thing. So I always say that the NOC, National Occupational Classification, is actually run by Service Canada. There's 16,000 job descriptions in there. And so what's really key is that if you're into HR and you're developing, let's say, an organizational chart, it can be really, really helpful. And then the other thing too is once you look at a position, then you can go to payscale.com and you can get, you know, basically the rates. Good reads are, there's a couple of good reads on how to start a consulting business. I mean, you just punch that into Google and actually there's the URL right there. And there's lots of articles. There's CrowdSpring, entrepreneur.com, that sort of thing. So if you want to get a heads up on the business. As it relates to the best apps for small business in 2021, there's a good article on that. And PayScale is where I got where I quoted the rates that typical consultants make. And there's really good information there. And then there's networking specialists around, and there's two that I noted here, and only because I know them personally. But Jennifer Beal, she's an excellent networker. She runs an operation called biznetworksnews.com. And if you go to that particular website, there's all kinds of events and support for consultants and professionals who, like yourself, are looking for ways to touch base with people in the industry. She's also listed on LinkedIn. And then Kim Chernicki, it's funny, I went to a webinar a couple months ago and I ran into her. And I guess my name was up on the billboard. I guess she saw my name in the webinar, and it was like, holy mackerel, she recognized me. So not only years and years ago was she in a program I was delivering, she also was delivering courses for some of the programs I was doing. And she's a real, wow, she's high on the corporate chain in terms of helping people find corporate clients. So if that's something that you're into, I'm not. I work small business, but she's really good. She worked North American wide, so she worked in sales pretty well, helping executives develop. And she's the person I referred to earlier that you can download the free Corporate Predictions 2021 special report. There's some really insightful information in that. That's the only reason why I bring it up. Of course, we have MBEC. So Laura, you introduced MBEC at the very beginning. I've been doing work with MBEC, you said, for a very long time. Since 1997, actually. And yeah, that's a very long time. But they do have webinars. They do have all kinds of resources. And so I'm not going to say they're the be all end all, but they're excellent. They're excellent. They've got an excellent team of people working with them. And so I suggest you consider looking up this information, seeing, joining in on some of the webinars that Laura had mentioned earlier. We already did the knock. There's also Stats Canada. So Stats Canada, this URL is the report that I based the consulting service down in terms of sales. It actually breaks down sales by the types of consulting, and it goes back as far as 2016. And then we have management consulting in Canada according to IBIS World. So if you're doing any kind of research in any kind of industry, IBIS World is excellent for pulling up market research reports. Oh, that's me. Okay, so moving on. And so that pretty well wraps up most of my presentation, in fact, all of it, and I'm hoping that there might be questions.
Thanks, Vern. That was good. I had a few questions along the way. Always, you are insightful and have lots of information, so thank you. So anyone who has some questions, please drop them in the chat. And while you're doing that, I also want to just mention, if you are starting a consulting business and do have questions, as Vern mentioned, we have a business consultant who can help with a lot of the government questions and the business side of it. And Sue, unfortunately, couldn't make it tonight, but she is available. I will drop a link to the form you just have to fill out into the chat area. And then if you are interested also when it comes to branding yourself as a consultant, or you have questions regarding digital marketing as a consultant, let me know. You just have to mention it in that consultation form. The other thing I might think, Vern, is we do a small group session and help with branding for consultants, because in my past life and working as a communications consultant with so many other consultants, branding was not something that we're simply focused on. And nowadays it's important, right, to be found, whether you have a website, just for that consistency, and even putting your proposal in, making sure everything's clean and organized. And I can help you with that too. And our consultations are free of charge. So just let us know, drop it in, say hi, and what the questions are, and Sue or myself will get back to you. All right, let's see here. Was great. top three.
While you're looking at that, I just wanted to say, because I don't have, doing a webinar, I don't have any direct contact with the audience, but I really hope that you enjoyed this presentation. I really hope that you gained some insightful, thoughts and some ideas. And I'm a forever optimistic entrepreneur, small business consultant, coach, trainer. And I hope that you're inspired by some of the things that I've shared with you. So thanks.
Well, we've had a whole bunch of comments saying thank you. Great webinar, lots of information. Just to let everyone know, as a reminder, I will send this presentation out. It is being recorded. And I will send a link to the presentation right away. It takes me a few days to actually do the editing and publish it, but as soon as that's ready, I will send everyone a link. And the step, if you had to give 3 key things to getting started, could you name the top 3 steps, what they should do in what order? Someone was asking.
Good heavens.
I know. It's one of those, oh my goodness. Do they need a business plan first? Do you go meet people and get your first client? Like, what if you're still working?
I don't put a circle around a business plan, and I'll tell you why. I mean, it's a very essential piece. But at the end of the day, it's all about, what do I need to do to eat? I need to eat, right? So I think the most important thing is understanding the niche that you're meant to be in. That's number 1. Understand the niche that you're meant to be in. Number 2, whatever that niche is, learning to talk or speak to your psychographic. Your psychographic, okay, so when you have a target customer, every time you change your geographics, your demographics, or your psychographics, you need a whole different approach. So if you keep it simple right from the very beginning, learn to know your psychographic, which means specifically the habits, the culture, the way they think, the way your client thinks, and speak directly to that client. That is so important, because once you do that, then you can develop those rapports. I remember David Maister, I think I actually quoted him in one of the slides here, but he basically alluded to the fact that you really have to understand the purchasing perspective from the client's point of view, not your point of view, right? From the client's point of view. So once you understand that, you need to be congruent with them. So you always have to be negotiating. You always have to be adaptable. You always have to be, you have to adapt to what the client is looking for. And you have to have that genuine interest. If you have that genuine interest, for me, it's not a problem. When I look at the size of this market, $13 billion a year in Canada, and I ask myself, how much do I want to earn? Well, let's say it's 50 grand, 100 grand, 300 grand, 300,000. Who cares? Divide the amount of money that you want to earn into the $13 billion, and guaranteed the work is out there for you. Guaranteed. So if you come back and say, well, there was no business, or there was no clients, or whatever, something happened where you weren't focused enough. So those are the types of things you need to work on.
Wow. Amazing advice to leave off for tonight, Vern. We just have a lot of people saying thank you. Great information. And one mentioned that is an incentive to get started. So I hope this did inspire everyone today. And Vern, welcome and thank you again for
thank you, Laura.
Great presentation. Everyone, thank you for joining us tonight, and we will see you again, I hope. Take care.